Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kasia Cordas, and together with Professor Samina Raja, I co-direct the UB Community for Global Health Equity, or CGHT. I want to welcome you to the webinar today and to our series more broadly. As an intellectual community dedicated to the promotion of equity in education, practice, and research, CGHT is pleased to offer the co-production of knowledge for Global Health Equity Seminar Series. In this monthly series, we examine a model of knowledge building that might be unfamiliar to some of you. Co-produced knowledge means different things to different people. By co-produced, we, the organizers, mean knowledge that is developed under the auspices of a cooperative, mutually respectful relationship between people whose practice springs from academia and those whose expertise arises from practice and or lived experience within a given community. This is the third seminar in our series. And today I would like to welcome two speakers who will share the stage. Diane Picard is the Executive Director of Massachusetts Avenue Project, or MAP. She has been with MAP since 1997. In 2003, she founded Growing Green, a program that employs and trains youth in urban agriculture, food systems issues, microenterprise, and leadership. With her staff, she has led MAP's efforts to increase access to fresh, affordable food in Buffalo schools and inner city neighborhoods. She received a master's degree of social work from Boston University and specialized in program planning and community organizing. After finishing her undergraduate degree at Cornell University, she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Botswana, where she taught agriculture and art in rural secondary schools. Her speaking partner is Professor Samina Raja. She is the Professor of Urban Planning and Associate Dean for Research and Inclusive Excellence, and also Principal Investigator of the Food Systems Planning and Healthy Communities Lab. She, as I mentioned, also co-directs UB's Community for Global Health Equity. She focuses on understanding the role of planning and policy in building sustainable food systems and healthy communities. In both her scholarship and teaching, she emphasizes the necessity for equitable and inclusive planning processes. It is my pleasure to welcome both our speakers, and I turn the stage to you.
Great. So I'm just going to give you an overview of MAP very quickly, and then Samina's going to give you an overview of the food lab, and then we will get to the research process. So I'm going to just go through MAP's mission very quickly. Oh, we forgot to do the gratitude slide. Sorry, do you want to do that, Samina?
Sure, I will do that. Thank you, Diane. So we'll start by acknowledging the land in which Diane and I do our work together here in Buffalo, New York. We're on Haudenosaunee Six Nations territory, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and the Tuscarora. It's important for the two of us to not only acknowledge the land we are as a history of dispossession of people, but also to acknowledge that these nations are here and that we commit our support to their work going forward. Diane and my work is supported by many partners in our city and region, but also more broadly nationally. And we're grateful for them that enable our work together to happen. As Diane mentioned, we have a 5-part story, and I'm going to turn it back to her to start with hers, which will set the stage. Over to you, Diane.
Great. So the mission of MAP is really to build sustainable and equitable Western New York food system by providing economic opportunities. Mainly we do that by providing jobs to young people, greater access to nutritious, affordable food, and social justice education. I'm not going to go through all these points in detail, but MAP was founded by community residents, so we were very grassroots. in 1992. We became a nonprofit in 2000. And I first met Dr. Raja in 2002, which led to Food for Growth, which we'll talk about a little later. But I first met her because she came to a community meeting I was having. Yeah, so our relationship started there and has grown ever since. And just to give you a little overview of MAP's history. So we started as an organization in 2000. What we were noticing in our neighborhood was lots of teenagers who wanted to work, and there were no jobs at the time, lots of vacant land. And at that time, you know, in the early 2000s, the city of Buffalo didn't have any kind of plan for all the vacant land we had. And then in 2002, the last grocery store in our neighborhood closed down, really leaving people with, you know, fast food places, bodegas to shop at, but not a lot of fresh, affordable food. And so we met Dr. Raja in 2002. She offered to do a community food assessment for us, which was really a vital piece that informed the formation of our Growing Green program, which started in 2003. So we do urban farming with young people. We have about 1.5 acres urban farm. We own all the land we farm on. And we employ about 50 young people every year. So their ages 14 to 20, they're all teenagers in high school. And we have a 8-week summer program and a 30-week school year program. So they're working with us year round, and they work in all components of what MAP does. So they learn the entire food system. So they're learning about sustainability on our farm. They learn how agriculture affects climate change. And so all this food that they grow on the farm, we then take that food to mobile market sites across the city. We started our mobile market in 2009, and we go to different community partner sites, set up kind of like a farm stand. We're there weekly. We're able to take food stamps and WIC benefits, and we have a new incentive program that was inspired by COVID this year. But our youth in a normal year also work on our markets and are able to kind of see where the food that they've grown goes to in the community. We also are able to source food from a bunch of other local farms in the region. So we work with about 13 other local farms, purchasing their produce and getting that out to the community. In addition to kind of the food distribution, we try to teach some entrepreneurship skills, and our youth also develop value-added products. Now they can do it in our commercial kitchen, which is great. But we have done things like jams and pickles and tinctures and dried herbs, dried mushrooms. We used to have a salsa and kind of chili starter product. So those really give youth an opportunity to kind of learn business skills from developing a product all the way through marketing and keeping inventory and all that. They also use our kitchen. They learn a lot of cooking, food preservation skills. We do regular cooking with them. And we are also able to offer those kinds of classes to the community as well. And then the last piece we try to involve youth in is really doing advocacy work around the food system and around climate justice issues. So they've been involved in a lot of different things. We'll talk about more about those in our timeline when we get to those slides. But this slide is, we took a bunch of youth down to Climate Justice March in Washington, I think it was 2 years ago. So we try to really involve them in different ways of doing advocacy, whether it's protesting or helping create policy or advocating for policy. We really are trying to give them tools for making change in their community. The last little piece of our history I'm going to talk about is our new Farmhouse and Community Food Training Center, which was opened in December of 2018. And this has really been a game changer for all our program components. It's really helped us aggregate and distribute a lot more food for the community. It's kind of provided a home base for our youth. We have a licensed commercial kitchen, which allows us both to do classes there, but also we rent the kitchen out to food-based entrepreneurs. And we're also able, we have a lot of kind of training space, so we do a lot of community education and workshops around growing and gardening and food systems issues in the city. So that's kind of the very quick overview of MAP.
Thank you, Diane.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I will take over and give you a sense of my research, which is intertwined with Diane's work, and I'll set the stage, and then we'll talk about our intertwined history or co-production of knowledge. So Diane shared that MAP was founded in 1992 by residents. I came to Buffalo in 2001 and was fortunate to meet Diane in 2002. And the lab that I am leading did not have a name at the time. And in fact, the first signature project that I did in the community was the one that she referenced, called the Food for Growth Studio, which you see up here on the top left. Before I dive into that, let me say that my research is, and the research of the UB Food Systems Lab is what we might call, some people might call it applied research, some might call it community action research. We like to call it policy-centered research, but people-led policy-centered research. We do a lot of education work, some coalition building, of course, research, but also really focus on the bottom on policy change. We are a group of people at the University at Buffalo, including faculty, students, couple of staff, but all students come from many different disciplines. So we are, even though we are housed in the School of Architecture and Planning, we have students from architecture, geography, public health, dietetics, planning, of course, so wide variety of disciplines. And in addition to thinking about food systems, we're very interested in how food systems can be used as a lever for broader social transformation. We care about food, but we think it's a lever for bigger things. We work in many different parts of the world, in addition to Buffalo, but today I'm going to focus on Buffalo because of this talk and what we hope to illustrate. I will say that in preparation for this talk, I realized that the growth of the UB Food Lab in many ways is very much tied to the work that we did at MAP, what we learned, and in fact, use some of those insights into how we choose to work in other communities. And I can share later ways in which I have failed in my community co-production work in some cases, and some of the comparative insights that come from working with MAP. So over the time that I've been here at UB, MAP and Diane and I have worked on many different projects. So Diane shared the story of how she met me. When I arrived in Buffalo, I called many different people and I said, I'm interested in working with somebody who's centered in the community and working on food. Who should I speak with? And many phone lines at the time led to Diane. And one particular person I want to call out is Zoe Holloman, who was eventually a MAP staff member, but was at the time working, I actually forget which organization she was with. And she was instrumental, I think, in understanding and drawing linkages between different community organizations. So we met in 2002 and started our work with what in my department is called a studio, Diane called it a community food assessment. So the UB Food Lab's research ranges in scale from neighborhood to city to region. On the slide, you see a timeline from top to bottom, and I have excluded national and global projects, and I've also put an asterisk on projects that did not explicitly engage MAP, but in fact, as I will say later, they were very much influenced by MAP. So what I want to point out on this slide as you are looking from top to bottom is to think about the scale and the intensity with which we changed our work. Initially with MAP, we worked on a 10-block neighborhood, then scoped it out to a citywide study, which was an evaluation of MAP's urban agriculture program that Diane mentioned that they launched in fact, I believe she said 2003, and then continued to do some quantitative work, and then later switched to qualitative work. And then we continued to do what in the research world we might call sequential research design, alternating between quantitative and qualitative. The lab also does a lot of spatial work, a lot of mapping. There is no map in today's presentation, but I will tell you later why. So we're going to switch and talk about the story of co-production. Before we jump into that, I do want to just let everybody know that some of what we are sharing today is already documented, and you are welcome to find these citations and read up if you have additional questions. The first is a paper that Diane and I wrote together with other colleagues in the lab, postdocs and students. And then the second is a formal food system plan for Erie and Niagara County, which is a region-wide assessment. And that assessment actually mapped youth contributed to data collection. So it's an example of a policy document that was influenced by MAP youth. And then finally, there is a reflection by a former student about what community university partnerships might look like. So you're welcome to look at those three citations. Okay, so the story that Diane shared was based on this timeline. I'm going to let her talk about what are some key points that she wants to signal in terms of the growth of MAP. Diane, over to you.
Sure. So again, when we were first founded, we were not a food systems organization. We were really a very youth-focused organization, and we still are. But I think the needs that we were seeing in the community really, and that combined with the research that Dr. Raja did for us, and kind of us looking across the country at what other cities were doing with similar issues, really led to the establishment of our Growing Green program. You know, that was, it first started with just the youth employment piece. But we were really trying to figure out how to get food out to the neighborhood. So the next year we started a farm stand at our MAP farm. It was very small scale, but the youth ran it, and started planning for a mobile market. So we were kind of looking at what, again, other cities were doing. I think it was in Oakland, there was a mobile market. There were very, very few mobile markets at that time in the country. So we started kind of looking around. In the interim, we also started doing aquaponics on kind of a large scale at our farm. Did that as an experiment. We were pretty successful the first few years, but once we started construction of our farmhouse, we had to shut everything down, and we haven't kind of restarted that. But that is also another kind of alternative, sustainable way to grow food in a city that we were trying to model. And it's nice that like Grow Operative now exists in our city, which is a similar kind of organization that does strictly aquaponics. So then, you know, we continued the program. Youth were selling food, they were farming. And in 2009, we got a small grant to start a mobile market. We purchased an old RV truck, which was sort of on its last legs, and we ripped out the insides, made it look like a little market inside, and went to, I think the first year we had like 2 or 3 sites that we went to. But luckily in 2011, we got a new truck that's a refrigerated truck, which is the truck we have now. That has really allowed us to expand. Last year, we were at 14 different community sites. So we go to churches, we go to community centers, senior centers across the city, and bring that healthy, fresh, affordable, culturally appropriate food to those neighborhoods. We've also started growing more food that our customers are telling us they want, so that have roots in different cultures. We have a very diverse neighborhood, so I'm trying to meet those needs. So that was going gangbusters, and again, youth were able to sell some of their products on the market as well, as they were developing it. And then we started planning for our new farmhouse and community food training center probably in 2014. And it took us 2 years. It's a $2.4 million building. It's very kind of sustainably built. And it took us 2 years for the capital campaign and 2 years for construction. But that, again, like I said, was really a game changer for our programs. Also, during this time, we've been working with the Buffalo Public Schools and trying to get the Good Food Purchasing Program, which is a national model based on 5 values. It's of procuring food for large institutions. And we're trying to get the school district to adopt that. And part of that led to the formation of the Good Food Buffalo Coalition, which was really solidified last year. And that group, which is led by MAP, really is working to both bring that food procurement, value-based food procurement to Buffalo, but also work on lots of other policy issues around making our food system more just. So that
Thank you, Diane.
Yes.
So what you heard from Diane was a description of the community organization's timeline and the work as it's unfolding. As a researcher, I'm very interested in, as I said, the role of food systems as a broader lever for social change, but also how the practices that MAP and organizations like MAP that they engage in, how it leads to policy change. So on the timeline that she described, other than towards the tail end when she talked about the coalition, there were very few references to policy. And I will share that when I would meet Diane and I would ask her about some policy questions, her response would be, oh yeah, it's difficult. And then we did this. So there was this response of, yes, policy doesn't work and we have to somehow overcome it. And that grounded conversation over the years forced my planner had to reimagine and reconstruct the problem. So when I met Diane in 2002, I was pretty convinced that there is a rational way of doing food systems planning. And we just need to figure it out. We need to make it legit. We need to get planners to understand how to do it, etc. And I remember a sobering conversation, which I will come to. When we did have a planning or policy success, Diane and actually another staff member at MAP said, I'm almost worried about this policy win because I'm concerned about how it's going to get misused against the community. So all that to say that the story that Diane has shared has forced me as a researcher to reimagine my own research agenda. So we'll switch to that a little bit. Parallel to MAP's work, I was engaged with MAP from the very beginning, when my arrival, when I met Diane. And the initial project that I did with them was the studio that she mentioned. A studio, for those of you who are not planners, is a 6-credit practicum that graduate students complete, which led in a report that was part of a class. So up until then, I had really done no quantitative research, if you will, in the city of Buffalo tied to food. But it was much more of an inductive process to learn what was happening in the neighborhood, and really generate a report that would be of use to Diane. Unwittingly, unknowingly, it turned out that Food for Growth was the first food system plan at a neighborhood level that got national recognition. It ended up winning national awards. The students were amazing. The students are now actually faculty and doing incredible work across the country. And then by 2006, there was an opportunity for Diane and colleagues and myself to think about how the lab and my research team might support the evaluation of their programming more formally. So in 2006, the lab started evaluating the work that MAP was doing, and they really opened up their doors and kind of tolerated all the IRB and saying yes. And when I said, you know, MAP staff can't be around when I need to talk to the kids, they understood, created the space. All that to say that it wasn't until 2008 when I published the first paper about what was happening in Buffalo vis-a-vis food. And it was not directly about MAP's work, but it was very much informed by what the children were telling me and youth were telling me at MAP. And I'll talk more about this later. This paper is one of the more well-cited papers of mine, which documents that the idea of a food desert is actually a fallacy, because we don't look closely enough in neighborhoods about all the other things that are there. So when I remember bringing some maps or data to Diane or to other colleagues at MAP, there's always a quizzical expression on their face about, well, this doesn't jive with what we're seeing in the neighborhood. And it really forces me and people working with me to really clarify what our definitions are. How do we interpret that data? Then by 2014, I felt that we had enough experiences over the years to trace some pathways of influence, the way in which MAP, but also other organizations were influencing policy. So in 2014, we wrote a paper which is, the title is something like Rust Belt Radicalism, but effectively pointing out how MAP practices over the years generated policy change. So one of the pieces that is not on this slide, but we'll head there shortly, was that all of this work quietly was also shifting policy conversation in the city. And most noticeable one was in 2015, when my lab did a region-wide food system plan. That's why it's in blue, meaning UB did it. But MAP youth were involved actually in testing of the instrument and data collection itself. And we're going to move forward to the next slide to point out some of those changes, broader systems-wide changes that we were seeing. So in green are things that neither Diane nor I were directly or the only person involved. So I'll point out some items. So in green are things that were in the beginning, except this one last year, are policy pushes. So in the city of Buffalo, it was illegal to have a chicken. You could not have roosters, you couldn't have chicken. And Diane, and as well as I and other colleagues, were involved in vetting and pushing for and advocating for what we used to call the chicken ordinance. It has a different official name. You can now have chickens in the city of Buffalo. And we also witnessed in 2011, the city's zoning code was going through a reform process, and the lab and other partners worked with MAP youth to train neighborhoods on how to read the zoning code and how to advocate for change. And today's zoning code is quite different. It's very receptive to urban agriculture, and quite a bit of community outreach happened at that time, led in large part by Erin Sharkey, who was a staff member at that time and is in Minneapolis now. Then in 2013, both Diane and I had the opportunity to take my research and her practice into some of the thinking behind the formation of Food Policy Council. We both served with several other colleagues in setting up what is now established under law, Food Policy Council in our region. We also collaborated on the launch of these policy summits, 2 of them. And the idea, the intention was to really use research to advocate for broader change in the city. And again, there was a dialogue between what my lab was learning from research and what Diane was experiencing or MAP was experiencing through practice. So those were some of the examples of changes that I saw early on. And then Diane referenced in her slide the launch of the Buffalo Good Food Coalition, which is, again, a broader coalition. I'll point out that over time, both MAP and myself have been very committed to the launch of other organizations that are doing food work. So for example, in 2007, both the lab and MAP were part of a coalition focused on healthy kids, healthy communities. And then in 2018, Diane and 12 other organizations, and some might actually even be on the call, were funded for a collective food systems transformation project by United Way. And the lab continued to study the transformation, and we actually just wrapped up that study to look at what happens when 13 organizations are collectively trying to transform the city's food system. So that's kind of the intertwined history of our work. I'm going to pause and see if Diane wants to add anything into it, and then we'll move forward to dive into the research process.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. I think one other coalition that hasn't been mentioned that has kind of formed out of this work is the Greater Buffalo Urban Growers Coalition. It's called GBUG for short, but it's a group of about 15 urban farmers that meet regularly and have been working for the past two years on a farmer's pledge to make, it's really for both farmers and consumers and anyone who wants to start growing in the city to make sure that they are using sustainable and safe practices in regards to soil. So getting soil tested, knowing the history of their farm, but also the group also developed some consumer information pamphlets, I guess, to really be transparent with people who are buying food at urban farms and farm stands about how the food is grown. They're continuing to work on some advocacy issues around access to water and land in the city. But that's another example of a coalition that has kind of sprouted up from this work.
Thank you, Diane.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that colleagues who are listening to the co-production symposium will have an opportunity to perhaps hear from other speakers in the spring that will be more forward-looking. But thanks for drawing the circle on GBUG. I noticed that my timeline ended at 2019. Okay, moving forward. So diving into the research process, one of the asks from colleagues at UB was, so we want to know, how do you actually do this and what are the pitfalls and challenges? So we decided to put up the research process and talk through some of the perspectives that community partners have, Diane has, and I have on what might be some challenges. So very briefly on the same timeline, I do want to signal that there are probably different kinds of researchers on the call, some who might begin with a tight hypothesis after clarifying the problem, proceed with their data collection, interpreting results, writing and publishing, a more deductive approach, as we might say. And then there might also be colleagues who follow a more inductive approach, which is on the bottom. I'm hoping that you're able to see, I'm not able to see the bottom of the slide. but where problem formulation is preceded by observation on the ground, and also continued observation and clarifying of that problem. So regardless of which type of researcher you are, I think it's important to think through what it means to work with a community at all phases of research. So we're going to use the deductive as an example just for illustration. So in the deductive process of problem formulation, hypothesis generation, here are some questions that came to our mind. I'm going to kick off, and then Diane is going to speak to some of them. So on the very left, if we are talking about traditional research, we might say, what problem is the researcher trying to solve? If you are doing community engaged research, you might also say, what problem is MAP trying to solve immediately? But if you are really interested in co-production of knowledge, that means that you are trying to simultaneously solve something in the world, but also advance knowledge. Then you might say, what is the problem MAP is trying to solve? And that has also not been addressed in the literature, and to do that problem formulation together. And then the second step to that, on hypothesis, I'm going to invite Diane to share what she thinks about hypotheses.
Yeah, so I think oftentimes, and I just want to say, we have also worked with other university folks on different projects besides Dr. Raja. And so I've had multiple experiences with how people approach MAP for research. And so I think, there's one approach where the researcher comes with the hypothesis already formulated. I think the way Dr. Rajan and MAP has worked is really formulating that together and making sure that, other voices are kind of included in that. And I think that early stage of both problem formulation and hypothesis generation is really crucial to the rest of this really working. That takes trust building and time and willingness to really value the voices in the community and what they know. And that has happened with Dr. Raja. It doesn't always happen with researchers. So,
in defense of researchers, we are not trained. I was trained by Buffalo. I will say that. So I think on this slide, we want to emphasize that in co-production, the beginning is super important. Of course, I don't expect MAP staff and colleagues to sit down at the computer and analyze the data once we gather it. The other piece that I do want to highlight, though, is that the constructs that we use, including in quantitative research, how we generate the variable is very much driven by what MAP partners see and in the community. So as an example, a very tight example, I was very interested in spatial behavior. How do people go and buy food, and why do they go to particular places? And I had just finished a mapping GIS analysis, and a young man who worked at MAP, I was explaining to him what I was doing, and he reminded me that distance does not explain behavior. Short distance does not explain behavior. He said, I live very close to Bidwell Farmers Market, but I don't go there. And I'm paraphrasing his comments, and essentially he was saying that he doesn't belong there, or the feeling that he gets is that he doesn't belong there. So even though it's very close, he doesn't go there. So there's lots of examples of something as specific as the distance between a person's home and a person's food destination was completely thrown out the window because of that discussion with that young man and continued conversations with Diane and other partners. A second piece that I want to say is that often researchers think that can we train community partners in data collection? And I think in community engaged research, of course, that's a laudable goal. I think an equally important question is, are researchers trained to work in the community? The training actually needs to happen in both directions. There's just different kinds of trainings that we need. And then when it's time comes to share, I'm going to invite Diane to talk about what she would say about how findings get shared. Diane.
Sure. I think, you know, in a lot of instances, there's a lot of research that gets done in communities, especially low-income communities, communities of color, and sometimes, you know, the results don't always get shared with the community, or the community doesn't see what the ultimate benefit is of that research. And I think it really is important to think about how and when the findings of research are shared with the community in ways that make sense to them, and you know, is on their kind of terms, and not, you know, having them come to a presentation at the university or something, which may be difficult for people in the community to do. So just something to be cognizant of, I think, on our end. I mean, I think, again, I want to say, like, research has been so valuable to MAP and kind of how we have moved our program forward every step of the way. We really have used research that Samina has done, and other researchers as well. But again, I think it's a problem of sometimes communities being over-surveyed, over-researched, and then not seeing the benefit at the end. So
thank you, Di.
yes.
In that same vein, in preparation for this talk, Diane and I were talking about, well, what did they find of value? So I asked Diane to list out for me what we were talking and just brainstorming. And perhaps this is not surprising to colleagues who are in the academic setting, but as she rattled off what she found value, it's sobering to share that none of that would be valued for a faculty member. So co-authored journal articles, for example, are a prime currency in the academic environment. And I'm not sure that Diane or anybody at MAP found the co-authored journal articles of utility at all. The other piece that I also, based on what Diane just shared, this didn't occur to me in the very beginning of my career. I would wait until the very end of the process to then give a product to Diane or to a community partner. But I've learned that we researchers in a co-production model need to be a little bit more porous. Early, you get the data. If they need the data, you send them the data with some interpretation, of course, but that you can't wait for the perfect paper to give back to your community partners. So conversations repeatedly over the time of the research and more informal ways of sharing, I think, become really crucial, both for making sure that the research is valid, but also useful to the partner. So with that, we're going to wrap up so that we have time for some questions. So we have kind of summarized 5 things. So the first one, I'm going to turn it over to Diane.
So one of our insights is that a Rolodex is not the same as a relationship. And so, you know, going to your colleagues and saying, you know, I have this study I'm interested in doing. Do you know somebody in the community who might be, you know, interested in this kind of research? That's all well and good, but I think really knowing the community where you want to do research is so valuable. And you know, just going back to the story of when Dr. Raja and I first met, she really, she called me, we were having this community meeting of community gardeners, and she asked if she could attend. And she spent time just listening and being in the space with us and learning like what is happening in our neighborhood with people who are growing food in the community without an agenda. She just came and wanted to learn, what was happening with food in Buffalo. And I think taking that time to really, finding out what the community needs in that way before you formulate the research project, I think is important. And even if, that your study, you don't have time to like spend a ton of time in the neighborhood or whatever, I think just developing relationships with people in community and valuing their input in a way that isn't just collecting data, I think is really important. So I will hand it over to you, Samina.
Thank you. And then for faculty, I think it's helpful to know that it is hard to work on projects where you don't have shared values and mission. One of the reasons that I think it was easier to be in the long game is because MAP was very much focused on systems change, very much focused on youth empowerment and using food as a lever. And that was very aligned with my intellectual project. So seeking alignment between the intellectual project and the community goals are more likely to result in shared benefits. Otherwise, it's harder to do that. The third is that this is on the sobering note, co-production obviously requires investment of resources, especially of time, but the long game is rarely funded by research funders nor by philanthropic organizations. So I'm not sure anybody would fund MAP for an 18-year project, nor would I get funded for a grant project that was for 18 years. But having said that, I do want to say that we have to be strategic, that it's not necessary for it to be a pot of money that supports work over the years. As a state university, I am really privileged to be able to dedicate my time on projects with MAP. And in fact, to give a shout out to my first chairperson at UB, who I went to and said, I have no money, MAP doesn't have money, would like to do the studio. And she said, go forth and do good stuff. So Kate Foster was the chair at that time, and she supported the work. And the last point I'll make about resources is, even though it requires resources, they are not resources that are higher than traditional large survey projects. Having looked at NIH budgets for grants, looked at NSF budgets for grants, I am no longer convinced that co-production requires more money than traditional research. The fourth point is that co-production is more likely to engage with questions of equity because researchers like myself are forced to confront their blind spots. I did not grow up in Buffalo. You can probably guess from my accent, I'm a Kashmiri American, and I very much enjoy my own heritage, but I also recognize that to work in the city of Buffalo, in the Black neighborhoods, in the brown neighborhoods, I really have blind spots, and there's no way to confront them without the support of my partners in the community. So being open to recognizing that I'm more likely to see inequities if I spend time in the neighborhood. I'm gonna hand it over to Diane to wrap up with our fifth and final point.
Yeah, so co-production is more likely to result in the use of research for action, but not necessarily journal articles. So, I know it is very important for academics to publish, and I definitely respect that. But when you're doing co-production, like Samina and I have, a lot of it is so that we can make change. We can make change in the community. We can build better and more just food systems. And that knowledge really informs how we do that. But I know there's such pressure you know, when you're an academic to publish, let me tell you, as a community person, we don't really care if you publish. So there's this kind of tension because, you know, that's the way the academic world is structured. And but I think when you work in a co-production kind of way, honestly, I think more can happen and to lead to a change that you're trying to make. So.
Thank you for that, Diane. On a positive note, I will say that universities are starting to recognize, and even larger national funding agencies like National Science Foundation now have a term called convergence. They are looking for disciplines to work together and to have an impact of that research. So I think there is a shift in academic environments. We wish it was faster, but I think we are beginning to see it. And certainly, I think that more needs to happen in the world of co-production. With that, we are going to open up for conversation. And I failed to mention that this is actually a picture of MAP Youth with staff. And here is a person who's actually a former UB student who now is a staff member at MAP. And this baby, I've forgotten when the baby was born, that baby no longer looks like that, the baby looks like that. So with that, we open it up for conversation. I'm gonna stop sharing, if that's okay.
Right, so I'm just going to jump in here and say, what a great presentation. Thank you both so much for sharing, for kind of doing this really nice conversation together about your experiences and showing these intertwined timelines, which were really great to demonstrate how the two histories overlapped. We have one question in chat, and we have more in the Q&A. So I will read those out to you, although I think you can see them as well, but I will read them out so that others can hear as well. And others, as we're doing this, please do use either the chat box or the Q&A function to post your questions. So the first question is from Alex Judelson. Hello, Alex. Who says, thank you for this informative presentation. How do early career scholars balance the work that is important for community needs and that work and the work that is needed to advance our careers?
I will take that one. I think that if you, thank you, Alex, for that question. I suspect you can answer that question actually, but I will give it my best. I think that reflecting on the 18 years with Diane, I realized that having the studio up front was a teaching activity. It was not part of my research responsibility. And so I think to engage in the community, one way that early career scholars can do that is to do it through a class. Unless there is a funded opportunity to design a project that is a community engaged project. And to be honest with you, I did not have the experience or the training or even an awareness of how to design a community engaged project when I started. But I think there are lots of opportunities now to do that. And in fact, even as an early career scholar, you can design something called an integrated project that includes research, action, and community benefit into the design of the project. So I would suggest that would be one way to go. The other would be to try a studio and then find allies in your university that support that work. That would be another one.
Thank you. The next question is or comment and question is from Barbara Bono. Diane, I love your new farmhouse. That's a direct quote. so she's interested in architect and construction company, but additionally is asking, can you tell us something more of how you have been able to use the building as a hub for your work pre and post COVID?
Sure. I'll start with pre-COVID. We had a year of working in there pre-COVID. So, I think one of the great things about the building is in the basement, we have about 1,500 square feet of cold and dry storage, which is a lot of space. And that has really allowed us to source a lot more local food from local farms and be able to store that for a longer amount of time. Prior to the farmhouse, we ran our mobile market out of 3 residential refrigerators and a tiny little closet. So it was really wonderful to have this new space that has all this food storage capacity. And that's really allowed us to ramp up our mobile market. The kitchen and our training space has allowed us to really expand the amount of community education we're doing. We still do about the same amount of, employ about the same amount of youth and do, kind of similar training with them, but the building has really allowed us to do a lot more for the community. We've had, we do a series of workshops every spring with Grassroots Gardens of Western New York, and we're doing cooking classes all the time. So that has been really great in terms of being able to use that resource to expand community knowledge. And I think too, it's just been a great meeting space. So many small nonprofits don't have space to have board retreats or have bigger meetings. And we've been able to provide that space for several nonprofits. So, having a place to gather and kind of plan and just, have different community food stakeholders come together and have a meeting space. That's been a really nice benefit of the building as well. So, and then post-COVID, we really kind of pivoted our mobile market work early in the year to aggregating food and getting it out to pantries, mainly to Feed Buffalo, which is just down the street from us, which is a halal and healthy food focused pantry. But we also distributed to other pantries as well. And then, so we did that from March to about June. And then in June, our market started up again. And so instead of just having a farm stand, which is usually what we do at different sites, we had less community sites this year, but we had more ways of distributing produce. So we had farm stands at all our sites, but we also had food boxes. We have a partnership with Fresh Fix, so we're able to offer affordable food boxes for people that we could drop off at different sites. We also had online ordering and delivery options, and we were able, actually, we got a pretty substantial grant from Rich Products this summer that allowed us to start an all access pass program, which is basically anyone who identifies a financial need around food or anything. I mean, if we have so many unemployed people coming to our markets, so anyone who has a financial need, they don't have to be on food stamps, they don't have to be on any other government support programs, they will get 50% off on their produce. So we've seen really a great reaction from the community on that program, and we're continuing to run our some of our markets through the winter this year too. So really trying to meet that need. So
thank you. And I'm excited to say that there's more questions coming in, so I will do my best to get to all of them. So the next one is from a student, Nadia. Thank you for joining us. The question is, I am hoping that both of you can answer from your perspective. So, and Diane, maybe you can go first. So how do we as early career researchers approach communities to engage with them successfully? So again, this is a question that's posed by a student, so not a faculty member, but obviously someone who's interested in this type of work. So Diane, can you start? And then Samina, maybe you can answer next from your perspective.
Sure. I know it probably seems daunting if you don't know anyone in the community, but I would just suggest, like, if there's, you know, if you're interested in food, find out who's doing things in the community and go to their meetings. Like, don't try to set up a different meeting with them, but because everyone's just totally strapped right now. But if they're having, you know, a meeting that's open to the community, I would try to go and attend some of those meetings and just find out what they're doing more and start that relationship there. I mean, that's basically how Samina and I met, is that she just called me up and said, can I come to this meeting? And it grew from there. So that would be my advice.
That's good advice. In addition to that, I'm trying to put myself in Nadia's shoes, and I'm also trying to think about what made me ask Diane that question, given that I said I was not trained that way. So I have to step back and I think rectify a comment that I made. Even though I was not trained in co-production per se, I did have the opportunity to watch my own mentors. So I did my PhD at UW-Madison, and one of my mentors, Jerry Kaufman, who we might say is the father of food systems planning, I recall him taking a whole bunch of us to Milwaukee to meet this tall gentleman who later I got to know as Will Allen, dragged my daughter along and broke bread with them, sat with them. I was a PhD student, and I was also a parent, and I had a two-year-old daughter, and I remember Will Allen putting worms in my daughter's hands, and it was a very meaningful experience for families, getting to know each other as people. There was not this intention to be there, that we are here to study you, and you are here to tell us what to learn. So even though Diane says you should show up and learn, but I think in addition to that, you have to just build relationships. That was kind of the point she was making earlier. And one of the downsides of being in an academic environment is we're so trained to learn, absorb information, critique, argue, poke holes, and look at how does evidence hold up, that sometimes in our search for evidence, we fail to build relationships. And I think that it's really important to know how to generate evidence and to do all of that. But to show up in a community, I think you have to show up with a willingness to build relationships. Everything else is secondary. And I think that's probably why I asked Diane if I could visit that meeting. Now I'm kind of doing a retrospective analysis of my own behavior. So that would be my recommendation. The other thing is there is a lot of literature on co-production. So as academics, we do a literature review before we decide which variable would be good in a regression model. For goodness sake, if you do a literature review to do a regression model, do a literature review to figure out how to do co-production. There's a ton of literature. So that would be my other recommendation. The final one is when you go to a community, that community has a history. And again, as academics, we have the privilege of being able to dig up historical artifacts, papers, books. In every city, we should read its history. I was kind of shocked how little I knew about Buffalo's history when I arrived here. And it's still a project. I knew very little about the Black leadership in setting up the school breakfast program at UB. Just a ton. So I think studying the community and doing your homework before you show up is also helpful.
Thank you. Those were great answers. The next question comes from Derek. Thank you for your presentation. Can you share some examples of community engagement methods developed from collaboration with community partners rather than framed from traditional academia? A follow-up to that is how have you more truthful data with the community?
Samina, I'll let you take that one. Hi, Derek.
It's a great question. I'm also going to do a little co-production with Derek here and turn the tables on him. So I have to say that it's really joyful to have students and colleagues on the call. So Derek is one of the people who made co-production possible. So Derek worked on one of the projects in the city of Buffalo, as did several others. He called it the studio that wasn't a studio, were his words one time. Okay, so I will answer your question, Derek. That really come from collaboration with community partners. I'll give a couple of examples. I was really learning from Erin and Zoe some of really fantastic community engagement methods, and I'll give one around food. So MAP and Lab ran a salad bar at a public school on the east side. I forget, for 16 months, 18 months, I've forgotten. And the idea was MAP staff would run the salad bar and the lab would gather data. And we had to engage elementary school students in this work. And I was thinking about, you know, stickers and balloons, and doesn't everybody like stickers? And I showed up at the research site one day, research for me, engagement for MAP. And Zoe Holloman had put up these white, what are they, paper plates. And she had written on them, "I dare you to eat this." So my researcher's head was, let's encourage kids to eat. And she was telling them, "I dare you to come near me and eat this." And then she put it in front of chickpeas. And it completely pivoted my head about how to engage kids. And I recall the principal, actually not the principal, but somebody in the city school system saying, "Oh, children are not going to eat this." We had almost 98% participation rate from the kids in the school. So much so that we actually ran out of food in that particular salad bar. So I would say, Derek, that was one, is to build on people's experiences in the community and develop engagement methods rooted in that. In that example, Zoe was very well trained to work with youth, far more than me. Then the second question that you are asking is, how have you had to adapt your research to collect better and more truthful data? That's a fantastic question. And I would say the answer to that is, I have realized that it's really essential for me to blend different methods. I have to blend GIS with qualitative interviews, with survey methods. I have changed in how I sequence them. So I used to be able to, well, I used to do secondary data analysis first. I would do mapping first, and then I would show it to somebody. In fact, we almost missed a flight one day. Diane and I were at an airport. I was showing her a GIS map, and she, you know, kind of in a very nice way said, I was saying that this is the map maybe that can drive. Is this what you're using for mobile market? I don't even remember what the point was of the map now, but I recall her saying that, no, we can't take mobile markets just where it looks on a map, because we need partnerships from those sites in order to run that market. So in that example, I learned that I actually need to have a kind of a periodic conversation with either staff or MAP or listen in the community, and then rejig my methods. So I think that's what's changed is I've become much more of a mixed methods person, but also to sequence it in a different way.
Thank you. The next question is from our own Jessica. Can you speak to how to engage policymakers in co-produced work? Is that in and of itself another spoke to a co-production wheel?
So I will start. Yes, I would say that is another spoke. And, you know, I think our approach has really been doing a lot of education with policymakers. We had the 2 policy summits that Samina was instrumental in organizing that really was the first introduction that a lot of policymakers had to what even a food system was. And I think in Buffalo, we've come some way with policymakers. I think there's a lot still to go, but I think things are changing. You know, I think having a zoning code that includes urban agriculture and food systems components is something. I think, you know, more and more people both in municipal and county government are understanding the importance of food systems, and I think food systems in planning too, which you know, Dr. Raja has been instrumental in. So, so yes, I think including policymakers in this work is really crucial. It does always take longer than I like, but yes. I don't know, Samina, if you have thoughts.
It's a really interesting point, Jessica. I would say that one example, we do have 2 examples where we did engage policymakers in co-produced work. One is, again, when we say work, what's the outcome? So if we look at the work that resulted in Rust Belt radicalism and really translating some of the legislative work and creation of a food policy council, we very much worked closely with a policy champion. And I think that helped our case. And that policy champion, we're just gonna name him here, his name is Sean Mulligan. And at the time he was with Councilmember Rivera's office. And I don't think, well, Diane can correct me, I don't think I or Diane, well, I don't want to speak for Diane. I don't think I would have been successful in getting the Food Policy Council legislation to where it was without Sean. Do you agree, Diane?
I agree, yeah.
So to your point, Jessica, in the examples where we have done co-production work that was tied to policymakers, there was definitely a policy champion in it. And in our case, historically, that was Councilmember Rivera. And I think he came to the table because he saw MAP's work. So it's a bit of an kind of an intersection or a Venn diagram. I use MAP's work and also many other partners. Today we're talking about MAP. I use MAP's work to illustrate why policy falls short or how it has to change. But I don't think David Rivera would be convinced by my journal articles. Policymakers are really convinced by stories, by narrative. And I think that you are absolutely right in that when you do have co-production, means a community partner is visible, engaged in the whole process. That's why you're more likely to have policy impact. One tactic that we did use, it was very simple, but simple is good. When we did the Food Policy Summit, we organized a bus tour. We literally put people on a bus and took them from one food system location to another, and later heard from staff that that was very powerful. And I think GBUG did that again, or is going to do it.
Yeah, we just did it this fall. We had another one.
That
It
would
was
be my
mostly
answer.
visiting urban farms, but yeah.
Thank you. So there's actually a question from Eli that that is sort of along those same themes that you were just mentioning. In a published or peers academic environment that has been slow to change, I am wondering if there would be value in rethinking journal articles. For example, what if it were more standard practice for journal articles to be paired with a companion policy brief or something similar? Could this be more mutually beneficial for the researcher and community partner, and obviously involving policymakers in that same process?
Yeah, you want to kick off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be helpful. I have to admit that, you know, I kind of, I don't think I totally understand all the complexities of being an academic and what it means to do that work. And I think I've learned over the years from Samina and others that, you know, there is this pressure to publish. But I think in answer to your question, yeah, I think having a companion policy brief or companion, you know, study or whatever, like I feel like Dr. Raja has done so much work that for MAP that wasn't published, but has been so useful for us in moving our work forward. So whether it's a policy brief that's the companion or some other kind of research that is the companion piece to that. I mean, it would be nice for the academic world to just value co-production more. I don't know how you get there.
The question from Eli, I think there's definitely, that's certainly a strategy that I have used. So I didn't publish a lot of journal articles on work with MAP, but I did publish with MAP staff a lot of policy briefs. So on our, one of our Healthy Kids, Healthy Communities Coalition, we must have published 5 policy briefs. Yeah. I don't remember how many total there were. And then for other articles, one of which actually was the Rust Belt article that was turned into a policy brief as well, partly so that it could be handed out quickly so that people would understand why this kind of work is important. So I think, Eli, that's a really good idea. And I will say that some journals are beginning to respect that. So journals are inviting a longer piece and then a companion piece. I still think that it's a little risky in the academic setting. So I think it would be foolish of me to advise early career faculty that that's the direction you should go in. But as a seasoned, somebody who reviews tenure files, I certainly give credence to faculty CVs that have done policy work, with one modification. Not all policy briefs are created equal. Not all plans are created equal. So I want to clarify that there is actually a very rigorous process by which policy briefs are generated. And as long as early career faculty find a venue where that quality control happens, then it's a safer practice, because then in your CV, you can explain that this policy brief went through an editorial review or it went through some review process, because that's really what colleagues are after. So that would be my one additional supplement. I see Kasha nodding. Do you agree, Kasha, on that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt with my nodding.
No, I'm glad you agreed.
I do have a follow-up question, and I see one from Adriana, and I will get to that in a second, but I do have a follow-up question, and this is actually for Diane. So you had said something, and I wrote this down because it was important, and it speaks to this conversation that we're having. So you said, you know, what's value to academics isn't necessarily of value to MAP. So what is of value to you? Can you give me, because I don't do co-production of knowledge, but it's something that I'm really interested in. And, you know, as an academic, you know, I'm hearing things that address these issues from an academic standpoint. But so what was of value to you? What was in this process of working with Samina and co-producing knowledge together? What did you get out of it that was of value to you, that has essentially helped you continue for 18 years and put up with articles? So can you speak to that, and hopefully
Sure.
that will give us an idea of what that looks like from your side?
Sure. I mean, I think there's multiple things that have been really useful on our kind of Growing Green program front. Dr. Raja has been doing evaluation and research since 2006, I think. I don't know. So for a long time, and you know, having that kind of outside person come in and look at your program and you know, get feedback from the participants in it, that has really helped us like make changes to it, tweak it. It's just informed the way to make the program better, I think. You know, I think, again, I mentioned before her research in terms of when we started our mobile market, we were just on the west side, but we really knew, you know, the east side had a huge need, and but trying to figure out kind of where the best places to go with the capacity we had at the time. I think a lot of her work helped us figure out those pieces. And then just the policy and advocacy work that we've been engaging in. I think having the community partnership at oftentimes, you know, that would bring with it clout that we as a small organization did not have. So that could bring in people that, you know, if we just ran it ourselves, wouldn't come. So, and I think just informing, you know, the relationship, again, it goes back to that relationship. I think, you know, Samina has learned things from us, but we've learned things from her too. And I think just having conversations all the time and like working on policy issues and advocacy issues, and trying to build out networks. I think, again, it goes back to that relationship piece. And that's really, I mean, just knowing I have someone at the university who knows so deeply like what we do at MAP, and values that. Like, I can call her if I want to, you know, hash something out or whatever. So I think in so many ways, it's really helped us grow, and also I think she values community voice in a way I haven't seen in other researchers, and especially with youth, because oftentimes youth voices are dismissed. I remember when we were working to start the Food Policy Council, there was a gentleman on the steering committee who, so our youth wanted to have youth seats on the council, and they wanted those to be voting seats. And there was a gentleman on the steering committee who couldn't understand, like, why would you want youth voting? Like, it's okay if they're on it, but they shouldn't have a voting seat. And so that kind of, we come across that a lot when we're working in the larger world. And I feel like, you know, Dr. Raja really has always valued listening to young people and valuing their opinions. And that has, again, helped us drive our work with young people as well. So those are just some examples. I could go on and on.
Thank you.
Can I translate that into Kasha language?
I think I understood it, but please go ahead.
It's more like research language. This is a lesson in, really for myself, a lesson in what was useful and what was I producing. So really, it's not the journal articles. But if there is a nugget in a journal article that I think might be helpful to Diane, I might share it with Diane on a phone call, but she may not know that it came from the journal article. So translating what I'm learning from research into informal conversations, I think is really helpful. And also really a willingness to share data. So if you have done a survey, not the primary data, because nothing is everything is de-identified. Diane never sees any of the raw data. She might see the resulting summary report. But if the staff want some data, they want a quick answer to a question. It's, to researchers, it's such a simple thing, but I think that for community partners, it's not, because they have to go look for it. So I would say that that's something that university community doesn't appreciate, that they can provide that. Mm-hmm. So that would be my observation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Adriana, this is, I guess, a question and a suggestion all rolled into one. And I think this is to Diane. Would you ever consider starting up a Montessori school, a school that teaches small children about growing food along with other required academics?
Do you want to tell people who Adriana is first?
Sure. Adriana is a brilliant young woman who started with MAP when she was 14 and went on to get a master's degree. And hi, Adriana. It's nice to hear your voice. I forget your question now. I'm sorry, Montessori school. Yes. You know, it's very funny because we have, in all our dreaming at MAP, one of the things we have dreamed about is having a farm school, and having, at one point we were dreaming about the mansion at Knox Farm and turning that into a boarding school and having a farm school there. But you know, yeah, I think having something like that, Montessori, and even a high school that, you know, teaches kids about food systems and food and farming would be awesome. I'm probably too tired to do it, but Adriana, you are young and you have great ideas, and I think you could do it.
Thank you, Adriana, for being here. So for those of you, I just want to quickly point out that we actually saw Adriana. Oops, that's my email. I don't want to show my email, but that is Adriana at the farm. But she no longer looks like that, and I'm sure she won't appreciate me showing the picture, but since she dialed on, I'm going to show it. Okay.
Thank you.
Back to you all.
Yeah. Well, I think we will wrap up. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you both for sharing. I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody else did as well. Thank you, friends and alumni of MAP and the Food Lab and CGHE as well, for joining us. Congratulations. And I'm sure there's more to hear from the two of you after another 18 years. So thank you so much for
I was going to be
sharing.
retired on a beach somewhere in 18 years.
Um,
Hopefully together.
eating some scrumptious food.
Yes.
Thank you, Kasia. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thanks,
And thank you,
everyone.
Diane, for
Yeah,
joining.
thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.